All right. It is top of the hour. Let's get going. We got a full room.
Cool.
Welcome everyone to Tech Talk Tuesday. Dan, I'm going to have to, reach out to you because I can't remember what episode number this is.
40. That was number 40.
Wow. 40 episodes
Solid.
in 2021.
Yep. 40.
Season 2, episode 40. And if you're catching this for the first time, you can catch all the replays on YouTube. The Baseline channel is Baseline Web Training, all one word on YouTube, every episode of Tech Talk Tuesday, as well as all the helpful how-to videos that we constantly use over and over. And we're getting a lot more traction on the YouTube channel. So thank you for using it and considering it as your support on demand tool.
Yes. Well said. That's perfect. Oh.
Yeah. And today we are going to cover some things that we want you to just think about. Chris and Dan and I kind of got some concepts together and we're going to talk about them. And they're sort of things to consider doing in the off season and preparing for next year, as well as sort of thoughts of inspiration or how you might be able to use Baseline to build better relationships, either with your customers or with your agency, the city, wherever you might be working.
Yep. And if you think about it, it kind of gives them some insight, you all as listeners, insight as to what we'll be thinking about over the winter and start talking about more next year as well.
Yeah.
Right.
So quick introductions. I'm Andy Humphrey, Irrigation Technology Consultant. We have Chris Wright, VP of Sales. We have Dan Conger, our Training Manager. And we're going to also try displaying something a little bit different because we don't really want you to stare at a slide deck that has words that are just our talking points. We want to have this sort of discussion amongst the three of us with you guys participating. And so I'm going to attempt to share the slide deck on my camera view so you can still see us all here.
You got it.
And it spotlights Andy because Andy's a attention monger.
Boom. There we go.
Boom.
Perfect. Look at that.
It's all about Andy.
Little tiny Andy.
Little Andy. Oh, no, it's perfect. I like it.
Great.
Carry on.
Baseline engineered irrigation solutions. That's really what we want you to think about when you think about the Baseline brand and what we offer and why we do what we do. And then today's episode are, things to consider. So the first thing that we want to plant with you guys is a concept that Chris and I were both reminded about and introduced to at the same time. And it's this concept of smart soil. And these two images I have here, the one on the left is the actual sort of display picture. And then I've zoomed in on a part of the image where they call out smart soil. And I thought, Chris, maybe you can do a little intro on where we saw this and how it kind of really sparked our interest.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if any of you have been to or are planning to go to New York City in the near future, we encourage you strongly to visit Hudson Yards, which is a brand new development that opened a couple of years ago, but continues to grow as the largest private development in the United States in history of commercial properties, and it's a absolutely beautiful spot to see not only architecture but to also experience cutting edge technologies that have been implemented on the project in a sustainable way. Right, so Baseline has enjoyed the opportunity to be involved in the project. We manage the irrigation on site, and the site includes a massive rainwater harvest cistern and soil moisture sensors to manage how water is being applied to the landscape in order to maintain its aesthetic value. So when you go on the I almost referred to it as a ride, Andy, but if you go
like
up
ride.
to a venue that they have at the site known as the Edge, which is kind of a paid to play observation deck that's on the 101st floor of the building that has outstanding views of New York City. anyway, walking into the elevator, they have this immersive experience where they explain the sustainability of the building. And they included in that, tour, discussion about smart soil and how they're measuring the amount of moisture content in the soil profile for, aeration, irrigation, and drainage purposes.
Yeah. Yeah. And this site too is built on top of a train yard, at Hudson Yards. It literally is a train yard. And there's a lot of heat that comes up from down below. And so having that type of real-time data is important to them.
Yes, absolutely. So they termed it as smart soil in this display. And so that created a, epiphany for Andy and I. We're like, that's exactly what we're doing. We've got smart irrigation, which is typically associated with weather-based watering. And then now we've got smart soil that references, being able to sense that moisture content in the soil profile, and then add the fact that we now have EPA WaterSense labeling on our soil moisture sensor product. It gives us the opportunity to start talking about smart soils to manage irrigation.
Yeah, because you could have the very best irrigation system in the world with the very best spacing, the very best DU, the most accurate nozzles. But what we don't talk about is what happens when that drop of water hits the ground and how our soils are never uniform enough to have that perfect DU because they're just not the same homogeneous soil profile and or a healthy soil profile.
Yeah, or in an engineered soil, you may be able to enhance distribution uniformity in the soil, beyond what you would get in a catchment situation above grade.
So I guess the summary there is going into next year, think about the soil, not just the water, but all things that make up a soil, because that makes healthy plants, not just the water.
Yep. And with our sensor and real-time data and the EPA WaterSense labeling, to date, we are still the only company that has applied for that WaterSense labeling on soil moisture sensors and received it.
Awesome. Okay. So, we talk a lot about optimizing water use, and we talk a lot about recording water use and finding breaks and doing and managing zone concurrency, water flow. What we don't talk a lot about is water forecasting, water budgeting. And we have this sort of configuration and capability inside of our controller where you can enter a water budget, but we don't really spark the discussion about what is it and what do you do with it and should you care about it. And so, when we think about it, Chris and I were kind of talking, we said, we should really be talking with you guys about this concept and helping you talk to your, clients or city or the site that you're on about how much water will you need next year? How much water will you use?
Yeah. And Dan, you and I know, living in the West, what situation we had this year with the drought conditions that weren't realized by, where Andy lives in the Midwest, but, forecasting what next year could look like, and based on, whatever recovery of drought we may or may not get through the winter in the West, we need to be thinking about and considering how much water we will use next year, as I'm sure those, conservation efforts are going to continue.
So you're talking about what's forecast for perhaps weather patterns, but then you're also want to bring in budgeting and calculating how much water a site should use.
Yeah. And here right now, we're sort of like trying to get you to think a little bit, not providing you with the answers necessarily, but here's one observation that you might have. So Chris mentioned the West. This year was a very dry season for the West. And so it might be important to think about that and also perhaps talk with your client or consider your own site, so that this year you may have used more water because of that. So perhaps it could be easier to use less next year. If this year was a high water use season, you should be expecting next year, if the weather's not the same, to use less. And the other the other thing is true too. If it rained a lot on the east, maybe next year it won't. So you might want to have a discussion with your clients. So if you're using more water next year, there's a reason for it.
Yep. And if you go on the web and go to drought.gov, there are a lot of different, forecasting and modeling tools that you can reference regionally that could help you to determine, are we going to be using the same amount of water next year as we did, or are we going to be using less? And one of the tools that I found interesting, Andy, was there's even a tool that forecasts what they call a flash drought. So everybody, knows what a flash flood is, but it shows regions in the country that are susceptible to a flash drought, which means that, there may not be enough moisture in the soil to sustain a, even brief and unexpected heat wave that could impact how much water you use in order to maintain the aesthetic value of your landscape.
Yeah. And the fun thing with this is that not a lot of people are doing this or talking about it. There are some, but it is very, very few. So it's a good way for you to either stand out in your job, stand out in your consulting business, stand out in your contracting business, because very few people are doing this or even having this discussion.
Yeah. Or if you're having a meeting and they say, man, we used way more water than we expected this year, or was out of budget or whatever, you can be educated and have enough information and say, yep, you better expect it again next year, right? And kind of set that narrative because of research that you've done is being a good steward of the water resource and in managing your landscapes and how much water you use.
Yeah. And then you can have that discussion. Maybe there's some areas on the property that really have no value that they can deprioritize while, raising the priority on other areas.
Yeah.
Also,
watching the news here in Utah last night, they're talking about next year, even though we've gotten some snow in the mountains already, looking at the, precipitation forecasts through the winter, they're expecting it to be warmer and drier than normal. And they're already talking about, non-irrigated turf areas for next year on commercial properties.
Wow.
Yeah. And I could see using this information as well to bring up things that maybe it's hardware or firmware or software that needs to be improved, right? Because if you can't measure it, you can't even track it.
Right. Yep. So it may be a good time to propose upgrades.
We have lots of other budgets, sales budgets, expense budgets, family budgets, you name it, but we don't really make water budgets. Very few people do. Cool. All right, we'll move on.
This is an interesting concept. Now you went one too far.
Oops. There we go. Yeah, talk about this one, Chris, because I haven't worked on projects that have required this, but I know that you have.
Yeah, we've talked about this concept a little bit throughout the season, but I found it particularly interesting because the city in Colorado used our technology and applied it in a creative way in working with the water department to manage peak demand on the entire, water system for the city as it related to how much water was being used at peak time by the parks department. So we were able to come up with a programming configuration where we were able to, based on water windows and specific times, control the amount of water that was being used by the park to ensure that there was enough water and pressure available for other commercial properties that were on that same water system within the city, so that it was enhancing the performance for all sprinkler systems involved.
Yeah. And this happens with all utility systems, right? This happens with the electrical grid. Everyone turns on their air conditioner at the same time, and it tanks.
Creates a brownout, right?
Right. So they want to spread that out, and that's what they were trying to do with this peak demand on the water side. Also, a utility system.
Yeah.
Yep. So it can be proactive for, you to go to your water department and say, I've been thinking about this concept. I've got technology at my disposal in the parks department or on my site to, manage how much water I'm applying when. And is there, a way that we can help you and the city as a whole manage that peak demand better so that, it's better experience and performance for everybody.
Yep. And that could be beneficial in your position if you work for the city. It could be beneficial for your business if you are a contractor, because you have this great discussion opportunity that, we're not saying it's easy. It may take a few doors to knock on before you find the right person. And if you're a consultant, the same thing is true. You become more of that trusted advisor just by sort of having these conversations that could be new and different.
Yep.
Very good. All right. Well, this is a little bit more of a housekeeping opportunity, but we know from our experience working with all of you that not every single baseline controller gets fully configured. It may water smart, but it doesn't get fully set up with all of the tools. And we know that the reason is because everybody is very, very busy during the watering season. And so the off season is a great time to go do some of these, maybe air quote, administrative tasks that we didn't otherwise have time for.
Absolutely. So Dan, as training manager, you train on these different concepts or capabilities. Speak to what it takes to enter zone names and maps.
Right.
And
so in the fundamentals class that I'm virtually teaching right now, just last week we talked about working on zone names and some possible structures on them. That's all done under the devices tab, and naming programs done in the schedules tab. And actually this week we're jumping into mobile access, and then also talking about using the mobile app or the mobile access to geolocate devices to help speed up that map process. So, and each one of those three topics, I have a dedicated video on YouTube speaking directly to those.
Awesome.
Baseline web training, baby. It's right there. It's right there for you.
So is geolocating devices on the map using mobile access, is that something that could be done in the winter months?
It depends where you are, right? So maybe you need a snowmobile,
or snowshoes.
Yeah.
You can make it fun.
Get a little exercise. Well, you certainly could do it when your system's been blown out, but before you have snow on the ground, that would be. See, and I don't know snow, right? Because I have to drive places to play in the snow. So I don't know how bad that is, but I could imagine a scenario where you could do it after you've shut down system, but before you have snow, and then before spring startup might be a great time.
Yeah. And, one consideration would be not to unplug or turn the power off to your controller, keep it off so that you can still, perform these administrative tasks that we're talking about. Because if your controller is powered down, you really can't do much of any of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So speak deeper to that. What does it mean to have it just in the off position rather than completely powered down? And what kind of data can you get from the controller over the winter?
That's actually a great reminder, because when the controller is in off, it is just not going to function in its automatic setup, but it will still be there collecting data like moisture data, like temperature data, like self-testing electrical system, solenoids and such. It'll stay and do its under the hood protocols. It just won't run automatically.
Right.
And, zone descriptions and such are all stored in the controller too. So if it's offline, you can't really go and configure it, program it, change names, add pins. You need to have that controller on and connected.
Yep, exactly. Very cool.
Yeah.
So in setting up users and alerts, when we're in off season, oftentimes we have, employee changes, whether it's seasonal help or, seasonal positions. So it's a great time to go in and remove those that won't be part of the system next year. And then obviously update the information and make sure that those that need to get the required reports and alerts are set up correctly in the admin tab in order to get that, right? So, yep. Dan, we got a YouTube video on that as well.
Absolutely. Actually, I think that's broken up into 2 or 3. There's very specific tasks. Lots of good. All of those. We have several videos on those.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, you've also got the analytics tab in App Manager, where you can go in and do research on water usage throughout the season, and look at trends, or look at problems, or look at ways to reduce based on flow meter totals or site usage to help you in those forecasting of water budgets for the coming season as well.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. We got a couple more to go through here. So we got 2 more. This is second to last slide. So we wanted to remind you of a couple things that are coming new to Baseline in the very, very near future, and then in the close future. And the first one is the long-awaited, highly requested capability of Base Manager to do something that we're calling a runtime calculator. I believe we've spoken to this before. So if you're watching this episode for the first time, you can go find on YouTube where we have talked about this before. And we are adding a module into the schedules tab of Base Manager that allows you to see the total runtime of that schedule based on the allowable concurrency that you have set up.
Yeah, it takes in several factors, and it's best referred to as an estimated runtime calculator rather than a specific runtime calculator, because it's looking at the runtimes that are entered in for zones within a program, looks at the concurrency that you mentioned, number of zones that you will be running at one time for that program, and then the water window that's open for that program to run in. And based on those factors, it will give you an estimated runtime for that program, so that you know how many hours and minutes that program will run and whether or not it will fit in your water window. So we've demonstrated it, I believe, on a previous episode with Mr. Beers, our product manager, but it's pretty interactive, and I think will be a great enhancement to Base Manager to let you know how long a program will operate based on those parameters without having to see after the fact how long it ran as it's previously been set up. Mm-hmm. And then the next, we've been talking about it for probably too long, but the substation RV is going into pilot here very soon. And by very soon, I mean, by the 1st of December. So we've got a list of those clients that are interested in piloting, or what's the right word? Beta testing it. Beta. There it is. To ensure that it operates as intended and as engineered. So we'll be contacting you soon to get those to you. But we're anticipating a Q1 release of that product.
Beautiful.
Which is
just exciting. As a reminder, the RV, you think of that as remote valve. So we have a substation, but the substation today is a minimum of 12 zones, and the RV takes that to a lower level.
Well, I'd have to argue with you on that, Andy, because the substation could actually run one single station decoder. So it could go down to one zone. Conventionally wired, minimum is 12. Or 1.
You're paying for 12, I guess. Maybe that's
semantics. Today is the day of semantics. Nice.
Oh, cool product. Just as a review, it'll support 4 conventional wired zones on the substation RV. It'll be available in a solar power or AC powered configuration, and will include a cell modem communication device with the product that will connect to a base station 3200, and we can have up to 25 substation RVs connected to one 3200 controller.
And that operates through the cloud, not line of sight on that park. So really, in theory, your controller could be at Chris's house in Salt Lake City, and the substation RV could be at the San Diego Zoo. That's
true. It's kind of a ridiculous configuration, but yes, it could work that way. Awesome. And then it will be available in a CP version as well, so that it is a wireless control point, essentially. So if you've got a water source that is remote, can't get wires to it, or it doesn't economically make sense to get wires to a location, you can install a substation CP to control a pump, master valve, flow sensor, and pressure transducer if wanted.
Yep. Because how often are we retrofitting sites where all the wires are always run exactly where they need to go?
Not very
often. Historical sites, never.
Never.
Yeah. Well, I'm anxious to put my hands on one too. Yeah.
Well, that leads in kind of nicely. It's similar, but not exactly related to what we're calling the question of the week. And this might be a concept that we start doing more of in the future. But this actually came into me. I was talking to a very educated, high-performing irrigation contractor who's done a lot of baseline. And we had this great discussion about sub-main lines because they weren't really clear on what a sub-main line was, how it's configured, and what hardware or software is necessary to configure it and use it to perform. So, it's a concept we've talked about a bunch, and I think we will need to even perhaps have a dedicated Tech Talk Tuesday on sub-main lines, because it's a whole concept that we can really do well, but it's also new to market. And we probably each have a different way to describe it. So we'll have to work on that too, so that we come together on how we at Baseline should all talk about it. But the way that I like to describe a sub-main line is you can have sub-main lines without having multiple flow sensors or multiple master valves. It's when one main line is related to another main line, upstream and downstream, versus being lateral. They're dependent on each other. They're in more of a vertical alignment. And the cool thing that you can do is you can add additional control point valves, right? We might not want to call it a master valve. The master valve typically goes at the top of the system, but you can put additional master valves or control point valves downstream to measure, monitor, and control those sub-main lines, similar to the way that you would if you had isolation valves, gate valves, isolating certain parts of that piping structure. We can automate that using sub-mainline configuration and control point configuration.
Yep. Beyond that as well, if you don't want to utilize a control point device, whether it be a master valve, a flow sensor, or pressure transducer at a T in a pipe, and it's just simply one size pipe teeing into a different size pipe, right? It helps to increase the flow resolution, which can ultimately help to control your concurrent operation of zones based on learned flows, to enhance the performance of the system, because the way that sub-main lines are configured in a base station 3200, it's zones to main lines to control points, and control points to water sources. So it really helps to create that true kind of flow tree environment, so that you've got resolution of zones operating on different pipe sizes based on the design flow of those main lines.
Yeah.
Right.
And we are now at the 30, but the important piece of this is that how do we make this happen, Chris? Where does this technology, what piece of hardware does this capability live in?
This is currently managed by the Flow Station performance component working with a 3200.
So you're going to have the two pieces, right? Okay.
Got to have the two pieces.
So there's often some confusion because a lot of folks aren't familiar with what it is that this capability is in the 3200, but the Flow Station is really what opens the door for this. And so the Flow Station has this capability and more capabilities that can be used for just one 3200 controller. The Flow Station is not, its sole intent is not to manage multiple controllers, but to also provide deeper resolution and control for a single controller.
Absolutely.
So we'll be talking about more of that next year as well.
Yep.
Good. Awesome.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's a wrap on season 2, correct?
It is. That's it. So, till we're back in January.
Yep. Or before.
Okay.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll let you know when we get back on
there was a comment yesterday that they've been too busy all season to, join us here, which makes total sense. So here we are sort of like going off air while everyone has time, perhaps in the winter, to join.
I know, but it's also the time of year where it gets very busy for us on our side and planning and strategizing and all of the other trainings and education shows and all that we've got going on. But we appreciate you participating. Thanks for the accolades, Mr. Bannock. You are definitely one of our favorite listeners. Thanks for joining every week. There's many of you that take time to join us and listen. Hopefully you get something out of it. You obviously do, or you wouldn't keep coming back.
Yep. And feel free, any of the Zoom invites that you've received, I believe you can reply to any of them. And if there's topics you want to talk about or anything, just feel free to reply to it. And that'll come in. I think that actually comes to me, and we'll just keep track of it. And maybe we can use some of your input to schedule the next season.
Perfect.
All right. So at this point, this is where we give a shameless plug to sign up for Dan's trainings. Apparently he's getting pretty full after the new year already. He's there to train you on everything in depth that we talk about. And we strongly encourage you to participate in that. So with that, go out, work hard, be safe, happy Thanksgiving and holidays, whatever's coming up. And we appreciate your business attention and interest in Tech Talk Tuesday.
Thanks, guys. Happy sprinkling.
All right. Peace out.
Bye.
Bye.